I will start it myself, okay?
Yeah, it is recording. So, okay.
Yeah.
So I'll do a very quick introduction. So here we have Richard Griffiths of the Internet Institute for Cross-Cultural Management in Melbourne, Florida, not Australia. And so the plan for today is to go through some of the questions that have piled up over the last few weeks. We will not be doing the formal sort of introduction overview of the company. We did it a few weeks ago and we have the recording of that meeting. But instead we will focus on new updates, clarifications, questions for the meeting. And then I guess maybe I'll start with the first question and then Julia will go down the list. But the
It
first
will be
question,
great.
so with the lockdown caused by the coronavirus crisis, is it affecting your company, organization in any way? I'm not sure if you were planning any symposia as you normally do, and I suppose if you were, those would be canceled. But any other effects on you, on your clients, on your university? What's the kind of story there?
Yeah, so I would say that the effects on us have been rather minimal, and more, less so than I would have expected. Part of that is the nature of our clients, who, they just don't stop when there's an emergency. So one of our clients is the U.S. Army Special Forces. They have a plan for this. They've had a plan for this for a long time. We're working with some large multinationals that likely will be involved in the cure of this. So if anything, their activity is really ramped up. The other aspect I would say that's contributed to our operational tempo is that largely we've operated like a virtual organization before this ever started. So this is how we do business, and it hasn't changed in some ways. I'm doing a few more Zoom meetings, I think, like everybody else is doing, but we never really had what were face-to-face meetings with 6-7 people, and it was all as a virtual team that was happening. So that's the long answer, but the effects have been rather minimal.
Yes, and in terms of the teaching, as a professor, I assume you still have to do, to teach, and the campus, everything I assume is closed. How is it going in that respect?
That I would say we saw more effects from. The university itself probably, didn't have a solution for this risk in place. So there was a quick transition to online classes like most of the universities around the country and around the world. So, all classes are now online. For the most part, all non-essential activities at the universities have ceased. But university is still moving. There are still students who are living on campus. They still need to eat. There are classes that are being taught, and we're all trying to learn as fast as we can because we don't know when this is over. I think that's the bit of unknown that really has messed up the plan. Will we be doing this in the fall? We don't know. Will we be doing this this summer? Almost surely we'll be doing this in the summer. So we've been going through recruiting cycles. There are hiring cycles for faculty that have happened, and all of that needs to be working in systems that typically haven't been around for a long time in universities that haven't changed very much, in being forced to rapidly change. So in terms of university functioning, there's been significantly more impact of the virus. Have they done it well? Pretty good. I'd say, obviously they're going to be in continuous improvement mode, but for a university which changes slowly, to have made the adaptations they have, I think they've changed rather well.
Mm-hmm. Julia, if I may, one more question, just
of course,
related to this. One of your clients is the Orlando International Airport.
Yes.
And obviously this industry has been hit very hard.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you are in constant contact with them, but how are they surviving? I've seen photos of airports that are literally completely empty, and I assume they greatly depend on the traffic. So what happens to companies like that?
Yeah, so the airport is definitely going to go through what is some challenges. So, in Orlando, we see about 50 million people a year that go through that airport. And, what will be the number of individuals that will travel through that airport this year? In some part, it's conjecture on my part, but it would be half to a third of the individuals that are going through that airport. And that means the revenue from parking services, from retail, from restaurants that are in that airport is not going to be there. So there's going to be significant challenges to that airport. The part that makes that manageable is the way that airports are structured, in that the number of employees for the airport is actually rather small. Mostly the individuals that are working at the airport are working for other companies that have been contracted at the airport. So the airport can expand and contract its workforce in a rather flexible way. From a survival perspective, I think it ensures the survival of the airport. From an individual perspective, if you're working for one of those third-party vendors, then you have more risk as an individual, because you're not getting paid during this period of time when you come back to the airport. So there's a lot of complexity to it. But we're in no danger of seeing these airports dry out and go away.
But yeah, you're absolutely correct. I didn't think about that, but the airport is almost like a central hub with the multiplicator effect. You're right, they may not have many employees who work directly for the airport authority or whoever manages it.
Yeah, it's very small, a few percent.
Then you have like first layer, all of those food and fuel and whatever else, cleaning services. Then you have companies around those companies. So I think once the airport stops, you have like several waves or degrees of separation of companies that all get affected. And so I'm curious how that affect the whole, the city basically, because I think the ripples will go out all the way, to pretty much everyone in the town.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. All right, Julia, do you want to take over with the questions from here?
Yeah. We have a bunch of questions from the students who are taken up in a challenge with your company. And the first one is about unemployment that now goes up all in the countries. Do you expect that it will increase for your services?
Will the unemployment increase the need for our services? Is that the question?
Yeah.
I would say in the short term, what we will see is actually a decline in the need. In that so consulting services typically are looked at as nice to have in organizations, whereas the purely operational costs of keeping a company open is must haves. And I think what we'll see in the next year probably is a shift in the revenue that was geared to nice to haves over to the must haves. That being said, a lot of the way that ICCM is structured is, rather than just touching the surface of the organization like many cultural consultants do, we actually do a lot of consulting at what is the strategic level. So many of the things that we do might affect the core revenue of the organization. So I don't anticipate that there's any danger to ICCM. We'll continue to work. But the amount of work, I think, will be reduced over the next year.
Okay, can you tell us more about your marketing strategy? Do you advertise now, and how much does it cost, if yes?
So most of the strategy that we have for marketing, if you will, I'd say relies on speaking engagements and word of mouth. So we don't have a lot of what is formal advertising unless we have like an event. So we have a summit, then we may put some formal advertising around that. But other than that, it really is going to come from having conversations with individuals, because they come with really complex problems, and the solutions we have are not necessarily off-the-shelf solutions that are easy to advertise. So I would say that the amount of advertising is relatively minimal compared to what is I suppose what you would call traditional methods of marketing, which would be conferences, speaking engagements, those sorts of things.
Can I clarify on that? So when you say speaking engagements, for example, would that be like, for example, an invited lecture for students, or can you give sort of examples of the venues at which you might be mentioning your company to clients, potential clients, who then can become paying customers?
Yep. So these speaking engagements vary, in terms of what they might look like. You mentioned one, and it's a pretty typical one, where I'll get invited to a city to go speak to a group of students, and then maybe I'll end up meeting with their faculty. Usually I'll try to bundle that with who are the business leaders in that particular region, and then I contact them and say, hey, I'm going to be in town, and I could speak on these particular topics. Do you have people that would benefit from these types of engagements? And then I might have more corporate engagements where I'm going out and I'm speaking to an executive team, or I'm speaking to a chamber of commerce, something along that lines, where I'm meeting individuals who might have these particular types of needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Continuing your answer, we have a question from our participant of a webinar. Are you going to do a summit again?
This is a tricky one. So if we do a summit again, I don't think it will look like the previous summits. And this has a lot to do with what is our rebranding and our revisioning and rebranding strategy this year. So the summit has been fantastic for the politics of the organization, and I would say the relationships of the organization. So Voss has had a chance to come down and see what a summit looks like. And one of the things that I think I might have mentioned in our previous talk was our ability to reach out and partner with experts in culture. I literally could call anybody in the world that you could mention from doing cultural research or cultural types of interventions, and I could talk to them in 10 seconds. I could send them a text and say, hey, I've got this engagement going on, would you be interested? And in all likelihood, the answer I get will be yes, if they have time. So we've made very good friends. From a financial perspective, the summit is a risk. So you put on a major event, you have to bring in what is X number of people to fill X number of chairs. And what we found is that we're spending all of our time working on the summit, even though we're only having it every other year. So we'll have some new leadership coming into ICCM. I suspect that'll be one of the very first questions that they'll have is should we continue this? If we do, what does it look like? How can we mitigate the risks to the organization such that we can maintain the ability to make good friends around the world, to make sure people have a good experience, but also not put the organization in any kind of financial harm or financial risk.
If I may add to that, again, since I've attended a couple of those summits, one, it is true that somehow ICCM was able to attract some of the biggest names in the field, including some of the people whose work, whose books I read as a student, and then I actually saw them in person.
And Voss is one of these people.
Well, but again, like Fons Trompenaars, Michel Gelfand, I mean, those are the people whose articles and studies were assigned to me as a student to read, and then I actually see them now as colleagues. So, I mean, it doesn't really get any bigger. Second, what I would like to say, selfishly, I guess, I actually liked the format the way it was extremely, very much. And the reason for that is that you can see many of those people at regular conferences. And by that, I mean like the Academy of International Business annual conference, the Academy of Management annual conference. The problem with those conferences is that they are very, very big. Like the Academy of International Business, it's usually like 1,400 people or so. And the AUM Academy of Management conference, it's like up to 10,000 people. We are talking about they occupy like a whole downtown. And while all of those important people are at these conferences, it's first extremely large and improbable that you will actually see them. Second, the dynamics is such that people run from one session to another. There are like 20, 30, 40 sessions going at the same time. You never know what you want to attend. You always have this FOMO, fear of missing out, because you go to this presentation, you will miss 10 other interesting presentations. And in the end, what happens is you run like a hamster in a hamster, like you run.
Yeah.
And you go home and you look back and all you remember is that you met like a ton of people for 5 minutes and never really spent much time with anyone. What's good about the summit, the ICCM Summit, is that it's a smaller group. It was something like 20 to maybe 50 people. It's a group that everybody can sit in one room. Everything that is happening at the same time. So you're always involved in everything and you always see everyone basically every minute. You have breakfast together, lunch together, you go to dinner together, you sit at the table. So those 2, 3, 4 days, I don't remember how long it was, something like 3 days, I believe. by the time of the meeting, you actually feel like you've become friends with those people, or at least now I know, like, for example, I know that Michelle Gelfand has a daughter who does some sports. And so we were able to, like, things that you would never, ever get at a regular conference. You get to know them beyond that 15-minute presentation that you attend. And so in my opinion, it's much, much more valuable. Like when you come back home and you look at what you brought with you, it's not going to be a stack of business cards and you don't even remember who those people were. You actually became relatively close friends, or at least close colleagues, and friends, I guess I would even say, with those few dozen people, to the point that you can start working on something together, or as Richard said, you can email them or call them, and it will not look awkward or unusual. And so I kind of like those boutique conferences, plus not to mention that everybody who attends has this very narrow cross-cultural management focus. Again, you go to those traditional conferences and you will have marketing people, finance people, strategy people, like every possible subfield of management. And only a small portion of those people are actually of interest to you. Whereas here you have precisely the same crowd that, that are interested: cross-cultural psychology, cross-cultural management, nothing else. And so I thought that made it much more sort of focused and much less noisy. And so I personally, I mean, if you ever do one again, I definitely will come. So the only concern, potential kind of challenge with the university professors is that we are used to sort of university paying for our travel. And because the summit doesn't look like a traditional conference where you submit a paper, it goes through a blind review, and then it is accepted for presentation, sometimes it's a little difficult to explain to your accountants at the university what the money is for, because it looks like a conference, but it's a slightly different flavor. That different flavor is what makes it attractive to people. But at the same time, the bureaucrats at the university, they sometimes, are locked in that, narrow tunnel vision. It has to be a conference where you present in a paper. And so it becomes a little bit, you have to spend a few extra minutes explaining to them how this one is different and why it is important to your career. So I personally truly hope you will continue doing them. And if you will, I definitely will be there. So, and I'm sure many colleagues think the same way.
Great, Vas. Thank you. Thank you. I think you summarized it really well. And I'm glad all the things that you said are by design, so it adds to the pressure of our marketing team when I say, I want an event, but I want no more than 200 people there, but I want it to be profitable, only barely by $1, and so they have a balancing act that could be a little bit tricky in terms of where is this revenue going to come from. It may not necessarily come from what is the attendees. We have to find other sources of it in terms of sponsorships or such. So, we're still working for a perfect solution there, but my sense is that there'll be more on the horizon.
Continue talking about the marketing. We have a question in our panel. Beatrice is asking, are you interested in social media marketing? Very
much so. I would say this is an area that we have not done well. I've struggled with this a little bit as I have been talking to my students. So the students who work at ICCM and the program that I'm a professor in is Industrial Organizational Psychology. These students typically are master students or PhD students. Every now and then I may have a talented undergrad that wants to hop on the team, but mostly graduate students. And they focus on their technical skills that they're going to use in IO psychology. So they might want to learn, regression techniques, or they are going to learn how to put together an intervention, and they don't see marketing, particularly social media, as being relevant to their field. And what I always tell them is, regardless of what your job is in the future, you're going to need to market. You're going to need to be able to market your ideas, whether that's internally in your organization or externally, to be able to get clients. So you need to understand marketing principles, and social media is a critical one now. So I would say that we have what is a social media presence, but it is not as robust as I would like. It's certainly not as interactive as I would like. On the back end of it, I think we're doing a pretty good job in that we can go out and web scrape the social media data that is available on the web, and we can understand that very well. So we are using it to better understand our market and to better understand the market of our clients. In terms of pushing information and engaging what might be, potential customers or potential partners or, stakeholders that we want to be working with, that we're not doing well. I would very much like to see some improvement.
Okay, the next step I want to ask you about prices, because we have a bunch of questions while our students are working over the SWOT analysis. They cannot find much about the services pricing and the current products. Can
Yeah,
you tell us more about it?
I'm happy to answer that. And I would say this is pretty common if you're going to be doing any kind of work with consulting firms. They often aren't going to post their prices because prices in the consulting world, what is the best price for something? Well, it's what the market will bear. And so the pricing structure often differs depending on the client that you have, and sometimes the requirements of the client. So I'll give you some examples of this complexity, and then I'll try to speak about what is our general strategy. So a big part of our clients, if you will, are going to be government clients, and they're often the military. So the United States Army, the United States Navy, the United States Air Force are big clients. When you're doing a federal contract, the way that it works is that they're going to buy out certain amounts of time for that the professor may otherwise engage in the university. So rather than teaching a class, the organization is paying for that professor's time so that they're not in the class anymore and they can work on a particular project. When they're doing that, they're going to pay a federal rate for labor, which is, so you take the professor's salary and you divide it by 50, and then you divide it by 40. That gives you the hourly rate of that professor based on what is their 9-month contract at the university. So the formula for pricing is very rigid when you're working with federal entities. So we have no latitude in terms of what that might look like. Now we move to what are pseudo-governmental agencies. So Fonz mentioned the Orlando International Airport. That has a private entity, but it has money that comes in from the federal government, has money that comes in from the state government. It's overseen by a body that then has access to these funds. So what is our pricing structure there? It's also going to be tied to an initial contract that we have, and it's set by the market. So I literally had an exec come to me and say, this is the highest price consultant that we have is X per hour. And I said, okay, well then we're charging X plus 1. And that fits with, and I'll get into this in just a little bit more detail, what is a Cadillac price structure that I'm going to refer to. We try to come in at the high end of our pricing. But in these pseudo-governmental agencies, there is pressure to keep the prices lower. So that's not our highest revenue generator in terms of the price structure, but it's a significant one because of the scope of the work that we have. So it's a rather large project. And then what we have would be corporate clients. Corporate clients, for the most part, and I don't want to generalize too much because they all have different strategies, they don't care what something costs. All they care about is the value. So if you can provide what is good value to them, you can literally charge them those stars and the moon, and they will pay it. But you have to provide value that is equivalent to the stars and the moon. So with corporate clients, our pricing structure is significantly higher. I would say that it's going to average somewhere between $750 an hour to $1,000 an hour. That would be for your senior individuals in the organization. So usually faculty members or individuals that have a PhD that are working full time on some of these projects. Now that gets into this Cadillac price structure that I talked about, and I'll just talk about it very briefly, and then I could stop and see if there are other questions. But one of the things that we want to provide is, and I have no problem saying this, we are the best organization in the world at what we do. There are others that do similar things, but I have no problem in terms of putting our quality on the table and saying this is the quality of the product that you're going to receive. Because of that opens up the price structure. And when we price something out and I slide the proposal across the table, if the individual doesn't gasp at the cost, I've made a mistake. I actually want them to have sticker shock to a certain extent because they're paying for the best in the world. And part of what people view as value is what they pay for something. So this is a mistake that professors have all the time. They drastically undercharge for their services when they may be the smartest person to be in the room, if they can communicate and all those things. So that's part of our price structure. In the corporate world, we really try to provide what is outstanding value. We try to be as customer focused as we can be and user friendly, so it's easy on the client to be able to use our services, but we're going to charge a significant amount for those services in return.
If I may, Richard, if I may add to that, so what you touched upon is an extremely interesting area of research. If students would like to learn more about it, there is a book called Oversubscribed. And so it kind of talks about this pricing strategy, how it's sometimes beneficial to charge more, have fewer clients, give them royal treatment, and have a wait list as opposed to chase after everybody and never know if you're going to meet your basically profit margin goals. But one thing I will say to that is that there are two different types of products sort of in the world. There are some products that are familiar, like for example, I don't know, bread or gasoline or clothing. And we all know what those products should cost because we buy it all the time. Like we know how much gas, petrol should cost. We know that a t-shirt should cost, I don't know, $15, $20. And so we sort of know the price. And when we see the price go a little bit down, we know that it's a sale. We should buy more because the price is lower than usual. If it goes a little bit up, we know that maybe we shouldn't buy it because it's too high. We will wait until the price will be more normal. And so for these products, the demand and supply sort of and the price kind of work in the usual classic economic way. The higher the price, the lower the demand, and the other way around. But then there are other products that behave completely differently. And in fact, those are the products that sometimes the higher the price, the greater the demand. And those are the products that are sort of unfamiliar, products that people maybe buy once in their lifetime, maybe, I don't know, maybe a few times. And so consulting would be one of those products, maybe also lawyers, maybe, I don't know, some other specialized services. You know, people don't hire lawyers all the time. Like, for example, let's say a divorce lawyer. I mean, you don't get divorced more than once in a lifetime, and most never, and some maybe two.
I'm on my 9th one. No, I made that up.
And so when that happens, when you have a crisis, when you need to hire a consultant, an advisor, a lawyer, you don't know how much they're going to cost. Yeah. And so you go to the yellow pages or wherever you go to the Facebook, to Google, and you see a list of lawyers. And so they have different prices and you don't know anything about them. It's a new area. I mean, by definition, you're hiring them because you don't know yourself. Yes. And then the question becomes, so which one should I hire? And because there is no objective way for you or no experience that you have that can help you decide who's better, who's not, in many cases, the only indicator of quality is that price. And so you see, for example, one consultant charges, I don't know, $100 an hour. Another one charges $500 an hour. And another one charges $1,000 an hour. And then you start thinking, well, is one just more greedier than the other, or is he really better? And what clients in many cases conclude is that, well, if he's charging more, he must be better. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't be on the market. And because to me, it's a critical area. I mean, I'm going to spend some money on that. I don't want to risk, losing, for example, to my, ex-wife, or I don't want to risk losing, my business because something will be done wrong. You think, you know what, maybe I should actually hire the guy who charges more, because even though I would be saving a few $1,000s and charging the cheaper guy, but if he makes a mistake, I lose everything. Yeah. And so I've seen actually a few colleagues who said that when they started raising their prices as consultants, they actually saw more clients coming to them. So the opposite effect of what the economics would predict. So especially if you have the quality, again, obviously if your product is, if you cannot offer the quality, obviously, you cannot get away with charging too much. Yeah. If you know that your quality is good, it seems like it may be a very sensible strategy.
Yeah, I think you touched right on it. And that's one of the keys when I'm working with people in ICCM is that we can't afford to make mistakes. So, no matter what, if we have a deliverable and it's due on day X, it is going to get there. Coronavirus or meteor or zombie attack, it does not matter. It's going to be delivered on time and it's going to be perfect. And it's going to be more than what the customer actually expected to be able to get. We always want to exceed their expectations. And one of the reasons is that because they've paid a lot of money, they expect that, and we're going to meet that. And so, another big part of that is that ICCM really, what is the product of ICCM? This is one that most people don't see. It's learning. So, you know, we're in a university environment, and these engagements that we have with customers give us opportunity to learn as an organization and then to train students to be consultants. So them meeting those standards and being able to serve these customers who demand excellence puts them in a fantastic training environment. And that means they're going to leave our organization much better prepared for the careers that they were looking for. And they start their careers, you know, 3 or 4 rungs up the ladder, rather than, you know, needing to get those kind of early experiences. So someone who is in a program is going to leave the university with 5 or 6 years of consulting experience, and probably at the end of their academic career, air quote career, you know, they'll have worked with C-level executives, and that's unusual for students to have that on their vita. So it allows them to get outstanding jobs.
Continue talking about prices. We have a question about this from Mouse. In comparison to McKinsey and Company or Bain and Company, would your price still be higher?
I would say our price is probably going to be consistent or a little bit lower than something that was like a McKinsey or a Bain. So, you know, to elaborate a little bit, this is where it gets into Boss's comments. People are very aware of what they're going to get with McKinsey or Bain. They know the level of excellence that they're going to have, and companies will pay those organizations without even thinking twice because they know that they're going to get outstanding service from them. The differentiator for us is culture, in that McKinsey or Bain can speak about what is traditional talent management and organizational change issues and those other issues, and they've got great expertise. There's not many people that are doing work in the area of culture, and McKinsey may have to, you know, bring someone in as an outside consultant on that. So the other reason that we charge a little bit less is the speed with which we can work. So if an organization comes to McKinsey and says, I need you to build me another planet, can you give it to me tomorrow? McKinsey can say yes, because they'll take all of their consultants and they can put them on a project, staff it, and they can handle a huge project in a short period of time. If someone comes to us with a similar request, what I often tell them is, we're not the right outfit for you. We can give you excellence, but we're not built for speed. So we can move relatively quickly, but not as quickly as what, you know, a big accounting firm can move. We don't scale as well as they scale.
Well, talking about a team and a consulting, who your team consists of? It's also a question for from a participant of a webinar. You are so active. Thank you.
So the ICCM team, let me tell you kind of what it looks like, and then we'll talk about in some ways layers, the way that bosses describe this. So the ICCM is led by faculty members at the Florida Institute of Technology in our IO Psychology program. So you're going to see people who have PhDs in that particular area that have expertise in culture, and so, you know, there's always these sort of tales of expertise, but culture is the common thread. And there's going to be 4 of those individuals that are faculty members that are actively involved in ICCM. The next layer that we have are people that have professional degrees, PhDs and masters, but they're not tenured faculty at the university. They're research scientists, so they're hired specifically to work on particular projects and to make sure that they're handling the day-to-day operations of the organization. Those numbers vary. It can be 1, sometimes 3, but there's a number of individuals that they're on 12-month contracts. So for instance, when the university goes down for a week and I'm on spring break, I say, okay, you guys handle this, because they're not on spring break during that time. They're working. The next level of the organization is our executive team, and this is where we start getting into student training. All of the people that are on the executive team are PhD students, and they're given a line of effort in ICCM, and they run that line of effort in the day-to-day operations. And we come in weekly, and I'll say, okay, report, tell me what's going on, and they're telling me what problems they might have encountered, or resources they might need, or if they need an executive level decision, go left or go right. I'm able to give that to them. But they are, for all intents and purposes, the account executives for ICCM in that stream of service. Below them, we may have 30 to 35 students that are going to be master's to PhD students, and their level of funding will differ depending on the project that they're on. Some of them are, I'd say, geez, what's the highest compensated individual? They're probably getting their school completely free, and they're probably getting about 40 grand in funding. And then you'll get down to students that might be getting 8 grand in funding that is coming off of a particular project. And what we do is we look for performance, and when we see performance, then it's rewarded by getting higher levels of both funding and responsibility in the organization. So those would be all of our internal people, and then real quickly, what we would have is a network of individuals that are professionals in the field that we can pull in on a particular project. So I'd be proud to say, like Voss, I consider one of these of this network, and Voss and I have conversations every now and then where we'll say, hey, should we do this, or do you want to do that, or this would be fun, and we're kind of thinking about what are opportunities that maybe we pursue, maybe we don't, and we're always having that conversation. And one of these days we're going to hit one where we just go, that's gold, that's pure gold, let's go do that. And how many of those people do we have around the world? A couple hundred, something like that. And my job is to pretty much travel the world and meet these people on occasion and say, hey, what's going on? How's your family doing? Let's go have dinner, and keep those relationships warm and keep the conversations going. Because there's sometimes what happens for me is I'll say, you know what, you got to meet my friend Voss. Voss is a cool guy. Voss knows this thing. I don't really do this thing at all, and I just put friend A together with friend B, and good things probably will happen. Will that benefit ICCM? Probably not in the short term, but in the long term, Voss remembers that I helped him make a friend, and so we're seen as the center of activities, whether or not we might directly benefit or not. So I hopefully that gives you a good idea of what ICCM looks like.
The important thing is that you never know which of those opportunities will sort of lead to something tangible. You go to a conference, you meet 100 people, most of them you sort of never see again, but then one of them actually becomes your co-author of like 15 papers. I had that once. I met Brett Kirkman after a conference accidentally. And so, it was just another meeting, just like the, hundreds of others have had. And then boom, it actually becomes a, like a 20-year relationship, where we have multiple papers. So same thing with other things. So you kind of, you try everywhere, and then maybe 1 in 20, 1 in 30 leads to something. You never know which one, but as long as you keep trying, I guess. Some of them.
Yeah, that's our marketing strategy. It's similar to our, the speaking strategy. So when I go out and I speak to 100 people, 5 are going to walk up at the end of the engagement and have a conversation that is longer, and it'll probably mean I'll have a beer with them later in the bar or whatever. Of those 5, one's going to buy something. Are they going to buy it right then? Probably not. But if I go and I have a speaking engagement every day, well, that's 300 people a year that are going to buy something. And if they have a budget, when they buy something from us, it's not small. It's going to be $500,000 or $1 million. So, so the probabilities are in our favor as long as as long as we're active. So something that I always preach in ICCM is activity breeds opportunity. So when I'm having conversations, you just never know where they might go. And we've had some of just the wildest engagements that I've ever thought of. And I've met people that I never would have thought of just because I've had conversations.
Talking about clients, we have a question from Beatrice. Are your clients concentrated in a specific geographic area or not?
No, anywhere in the world would be, I would consider, someone who could be a client. So when I first started ICCM, I had made the assumption that we would mostly be helping American companies that wanted to go abroad, that were working outside of the United States. But at first, our biggest client was actually the reverse. It was companies around the world that wanted to do business in the United States. And to a certain extent, that was a great turn of events for us, in that I know American culture. So, I can speak to it experientially, as well as, well, here's what the data says, here's what my experience is. So when they ask questions, I could say, this is how this would be viewed. So it played to what was our expertise as we were building capabilities in other places around the world. but we have clients, and we don't have a client in Antarctica, and we don't have one in Australia. But those are the only two continents that we don't. And I'm going to find a penguin to buy something at some point. I want to pin down my continents. I like to get a consistent map, but we've got clients that are all around the world.
It's pretty cool. Next question is from Mose. Most corporate problems are business problems, so it is not mostly specifically cross-cultural problems. What kind of business solutions can your company provide in that case?
Great. That's a good question. And what I would say is the key to doing business in this space is to be able to reframe the issues. So I never walk into a company and start talking about culture. I talk about time, I talk about risk, I talk about costs. And because those are things that companies care about. Now, if I walk in and I say, oh, I see you have this international venture, are you interested in discussing how you might minimize your risk? Well, they'll have that conversation. And I might be able to point to where, a cross-cultural misunderstanding might lead to an enhanced risk of not closing a merger on time. That's $100 and some million that could happen. So we're taking culture and we're showing how culture would affect the things they care about, because no company cares about culture. Not a single one of them will pay a dime for a cultural intervention. They're not anthropologists. They just don't care. What they care about is their core business. So we're trying to show how culture will affect these decisions around their core business. And then, when we do that, then they're open and they want to have that conversation. But they may not have tied culture to what is the specific issue, or we often get called in because they have a hunch. Hey, culture might have something to do with this. And we start the conversation. So my advice would be always translate the, what you're trying to sell into the language of what does your client really want? What does your client really need?
Next question is about products. Current products the clients use and why, and what are the most popular products now?
I would say the most popular product that we have is what I would call traditional consulting services. So a company has a problem and they want a solution to that particular problem. So I mentioned mergers and acquisitions. We have a client now that that one of their core strategies in terms of maintaining excellence is to acquire companies that might have technology they need or talent that they need, or perhaps they need a partner in a particular region. And they realize that culture is sort of getting in the way of these mergers, sort of being able to be fruitful. So what we're doing is figuring out what is your core business, help us understand what it is you want to be able to achieve, and then what can we do to make sure that there are interventions in place such that culture is not going to be a problem. So it's a true consulting engagement in that it's not like I have a product that I'm going to go out and say, hey, we have this assessment, and we sell the assessment. What we've tried to do is use all of the products and services in ICCM in our consulting. So we have what is a nested solution. This is particularly true in the area of probably our second area of revenue, which is training. So when we have a training intervention and we go out and we're offering a cross-cultural competence training, during that we might use one of our products, an assessment called the 3C Navigator. And then the Navigator is something that we own. We have flexibility with it. It's built into the system, and it's a way for us to sort of enhance the training experience, but in some ways also be doing what is marketing. So these people are in training, they're seeing these products, and they say, well, what else could I use this for? And it may end up having some other use. So those are our I'd say the two biggest areas right now. And then the third, maybe, I guess what I would call applied research. So these are government clients where they have a particular issue that they want an answer to. And they have us do what is a large study, and you write it up and you disseminate the information. It's sort of the traditional academic model that you would have, but it solves a problem. So the Army is interested in identifying individuals that are cross-culturally competent so that they can be able to enter into the U.S. Army Special Forces and be successful there. That means we have to identify individuals. We have to we have to build a test for that. We have to then see, does the test work? So that would be our third area that I'd say, is, when we're thinking like product lines, if you will.
I know that ICCM is using cutting-edge artificial intelligence technology, yeah?
Yes.
And there is information about a digital tool that allows easy access to information on business practices all around the globe. Was it released? Like it says
Do you
in...
have the name of the tool?
This is information from your advocacy.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think if guided mindfulness, is this the process that you're talking about?
This is a question from students, so let's check.
It's probably, so I mean, I could speak to that because that's probably the product that they're talking about. So guided mindfulness, to start with, is a philosophy that we have used technology to sort of, I guess, technology would be the penetration strategy, if you will, for the philosophy. So the general idea behind it is that where do adults get value in learning? It's typically not the classroom, and you guys know that. This is the model of X culture that I really love. When you ask students later what did they learn and why did they learn it, it's going to be the experiences that they had with their teammates. But that only comes if you take time to reflect on what is your experience and you think about that and you derive value from it. But most people don't have time to reflect. They're so busy doing that they don't have any time to learn from their doing. They just move on to the next task. So what we have done is develop some methodology where it's a technology-assisted platform that helps people learn from their experiences, particularly their overseas experiences. That's in development now at the U.S. Navy. So we just finished up a study to take a look at, does this philosophy work? What is the best technology to be able to build it? Is it going to be a static technology or an AI technology? So it's in development right now. So it's not something that's commercially available. Without going down this path too much, one thing I learned early on in my career is don't build something and hope that they will come. What you want to do is have a customer who will pay for it, and then the R&D is paid for, and then I can give them the product. So we have stopped building things and then waiting for someone, trying to guess what the need of the customer is. Now what we do is we go out and I meet people who say, I have this particular need, can you solve it? And I say, yes, what is your budget? So that's a long-winded answer, but that's the product I think they're probably referring to. We use AI in a couple of contexts, but that's one of them.
We are close to the end of the webinar, and last two questions. Oh, sorry. One more from the QA panel from Melvin. What about marketing? What is your marketing message? I think we answered that, but maybe one more time.
Message. Is this, maybe you could help me understand it, or I'm not sure, but are they talking about the content of the message? Like what are we trying to say? Or is
maybe it's a main idea, like mission or vision. Maybe about that Melvin asked us.
Yeah. So Vas, did you have some insight on this? I just see your smile.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's a good question, and all of the marketing specialists say that you have to have a message. But then again, I'm not sure if many companies, like if you ask that same of X culture, I don't think we have a message per se. I mean, there is a general idea that we might want to convey, but we don't have like a slogan or message in a kind of traditional sense that we peddle. And maybe that's a mistake, but I don't know. You don't have a slogan or anything like that either, right? So like there is no.
We do, but I would say it's not a big part of our business. It may guide our thinking. So for the most part, when you hear people, they see the tagline, it's adapt, prepare, and prosper. So we help organizations adapt, prepare, and prosper in a global environment. Okay? Let me explain sort of what that means. How we do that is the third eye process, and that tends to be our differentiator in that everything that we do is bounded science, but it's real world. So it's not nerd science, it's not egghead science, and we're not going to overload you with information. We want this to become an intuitive solution for you. So the way that we do business tends to be, I guess, the message of our marketing. And at the end of the day, we found that results in what is a superior client experience that they have, because they get what they want, and they don't feel like they're getting preached to or being overwhelmed.
Your current research projects are related to very high level. It's a government organization, army, etc. But do you have some dream project? Maybe some companies that you didn't work yet, but you have a desire to work with them, and it will be the next stage.
Yeah, that's a great, that's a really good question. So there are a couple. So it's interesting. I didn't get into it too much, but Voss was there and for a couple of these events, and we work with the Buzz Aldrin Space Institute. So, you know, eventually people are going to leave this planet. We'd like to have something to do with that. You know, that's something that excites me, is to be part of that particular mission. The other need that I guess I feel is that, I mean, I think so. You know, we started with talking about coronavirus, and this might be a good place for us to wrap it up. We're going to face some huge problems as a species. I mean, I live in Florida. I live about 150 meters from the beach. Global climate change is a real issue here, and when that water rises, my son's going to lose his birthright. He's not going to be able to live in the home that I would have given him. And we're all going to go through these kinds of challenges that are happening. So whether it be a global pandemic, or whether it be global climate change, or there's some threat to our existence. And those threats are not going to be addressed by a single person or a single organization or a single country. It's going to be brilliant people all around the world that have to be able to work together to solve that problem. And they're going to have the challenges of culture. And we want to support that. We want to be there to help people have good, meaningful conversations so that we can address some of these particular issues that we will face. So that is one of our missions. You know, I guess you would call it the sort of social responsibility mission, but humanitarian work psychology is something that is dear and near to my heart. I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reasons. And at the end of the day, that we're having the impact that I think that we can have as an organization, maybe not directly in solving the problem, but in supporting those who are directly solving the issue that we have. So I don't know if that's a dream, you know,
but it's a very great idea.
Well, it keeps us motivated. It keeps us very motivated.
Cool. And the last, my favorite question is, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently?
Oh boy. That's a great question. So I founded ICCM 10 years ago. We're almost done with our 10th year of ICCM. And it was founded on an idea, literally just sort of type an idea on a piece of paper, and then we got a team together and got it off the ground. If I were going to do it over again, one thing that might allow us to scale up a little quicker would have been to think about the funding of the organization first. Like, so when you found a university, I can just go plant a flag in the ground and say, I founded a university, and build it bootstrap. Or I can go out and say, I'm going to found a university. Will you donate $100 million? And having the capital early on might have allowed us to scale a little faster. That being said, we did a lot of learning by having nothing and being resourceful, and that learning has value too. So if I could snap my fingers and go back, would I do it? I would think about it, but I'd want to think a while before I would go back.
Thank you for your answers.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. All right. Well, we've used up a whole hour. Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you, Julia, for facilitating the discussion.
Thank
so,
you.
Students, again, if you have any additional questions, you can always email them, and we'll try to answer them based on the emails. But otherwise, it seems like everything's clear as far as what the organization does and what the questions are. You know, what the challenge is. I guess now you have a couple more weeks to finish up your reports and hopefully come up with good, interesting ideas for ICCM. All right.
Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate all your time and effort, and thank you very much to the students who are working on this particular challenge.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.